Perfect. So before we introduce our results, I just wanted to give a quick recap of our research. And so we decided to do a two-phase synthesis model. The first phase, we implement a logistic regression model. And so we are trying to synthesize income. And first, using a logistic regression, we split income as a binary variable so that we have 0 for zero income and then 1 for any non-zero income. And then we use the logistic model to synthesize the 0 and 1s. And then in the second phase, we use the linear regression model. And so from the first phase, we remove the 0 income and then only synthesize the non-zero income, which in the first phase was just like the 1s. And then using the linear regression model, we synthesize the non-zero values, and then at the end we merge the original, like the categorical income of the 0 values and the synthesis of the newly synthesized non-zero income values. And that's our like two-phase model. And yeah, we used 8 explanatory variables. The categorical ones were sex, race, education level, health insurance coverage, and frequency of worry. And then the continuous variables that we used were age, hours worked, and hours of sleep. And then, so this was a partial synthesis for the income variable.
Right. So the significance of our research was really to compare this two-phase income synthesis with this first synthesizing the zeros and next synthesizing the non-zeros with a single-phase synthesis where the zeros are effectively ignored and you just kind of synthesize it while not worrying about how the zeros will affect the model. And so throughout the utility and risk evaluation, we have side-by-side comparisons of both the two-step synthesis and the single-step, or the single-phase and two-phase synthesis. First, starting with our global measures, the single phase is on the left and the two phases on the right. So the propensity scores were, can you go back to the other?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the propensity scores were roughly about both really close to 0, but clearly the one with the two phase was closer. The cluster analysis, both were 0, and the empirical CDF had the largest disparity in these global measures, where the two-phase synthesis seemed to be significantly better than the single-phase synthesis. And all of these measures are on average of 20 synthetic data sets, or just synthetic income. Okay, so next slide. And now, yeah, for the globe, this is just explaining basically what I said, the global measures CDF. Okay, and then the analysis-specific measures, we can see that the mean for the two-phase income synthesis was fairly close, and the mean of the actual data set was about 50,000. So it was a lot closer in the two-phase and the single-phase. And the median was where we saw the largest discrepancy, where for the original data set, it was about 40,000, but the single-phase was significantly less. And in order to investigate this, look closer, we looked at the interval overlap measure. And clearly the two-phase income synthesis was a lot closer of an interval than the single-phase synthesis. And even the overlap didn't even exist in the single phase, because the when we calculated it, we got obviously a negative value. So, and this is the violin plots, which confirm our suspicion about the discrepancy in distributions. On the right, we have the single phase where we see a big skew towards 0, which was expected from the beginning because we had a lot of 0 values. And on the left, we have the two-phase synthesis, and both on the left and both graphs are comparing to the original income. And we see that we still have this kind of skew towards the bottom and to the top, but it's not as extreme as in the single phase. And this is our risk evaluation, which we, based on last lecture, we implemented the radius for each measure. And most of the true match rate and false match rates were 0 and 1 respectively, with a little bit of variation with a smaller radius, but the most changes were occurring in the expected match risk, which we expect because most of the values in our data set for expected values were unique. So we didn't see a lot of like variation. And this is probably the part where we struggled the most with, because we weren't really sure how to interpret these values based on where like some of them would increase as we increase the radius and others would decrease. And it was just a little bit confusing to us. But overall, I think the risk is generally pretty low for both the single phase and the two phase synthesis.
And so following the results, there were a couple of limitations that we wanted to note. First is that at the very beginning, before the logistic regression, we assumed that a lot of the random missing values were just like, the random missing for missing values. And so we would just remove them from the observation, but there could be a chance that missing values carry some significance in them. And there's a reason why it's left out. Another limitation was that we basically chose the variables and we looked at socioeconomic, demographic, and health variables. And so it was hard for us to we use our own intuition to decide which ones could have the most sensitive relationship with income. And we based our decisions on that. Another limitation was that we didn't implement the attribute disclosure risks, which would have further emphasized the ability to assess the risk between the two-phase and the single-phase model. And the last limitation is the uncertainty on the two-phase model. And because we only used to synthesize, use partial synthesis for income, we could also try to use a full synthesis, and also to see if our two-phase model would have the same results with other data sets from other databases. And so the last thing that we want to talk about is the future research direction. And so for the first limitation, we thought about for the random missing, further exploration, so that we can include more observations just to improve the accuracy. And I guess we can also see, if there's any significance in the missing values that we have. Next is variable selection. Like we said, we based it on our own intuition. And so if we were able to look at other variables such as like medical access, or we can try to test, we can do more exploratory analyses before we start our research. And then also including attribute disclosure risks, as I mentioned before. And to address the uncertainty on the two-phase model, we could try to use try a full synthesis. And so we can use like the first part for the logistic model to split the binary values for income. And then we can use sequential synthesis for the second phase, and then fully synthesize all the variables that we include in the model. And the last thing that we wanted to suggest was top coding. And if there's a way we can implement that to protect the privacy of individuals' income, especially if there are very noticeable outliers, and how that would improve the utility and risk evaluations. And these are our references. Thank you.
Thank you.